They are struggling as a party to get past the very narrative of Liz Truss.
Frankly, when I hear Liz Truss, I think, is she being paid a retainer by the Labour Party to carry on saying things out loud? She's still utterly convinced that she is right and she's going to go down fighting. I wonder how much further it has to go before someone says, right, we can't have her in the party anymore.
They cannot start carving a path for Kemi Badenoch or for whoever, frankly, comes afterwards to lead them anywhere if they don't box up Liz Truss and say, look, we get it, but she was an aberration. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. Nearly 3 years on from Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget, her party are determined to tell us it will never happen again.
Back then, the stakes were recognised and stability restored within weeks with the full backing of my party. But the damage to our credibility is not so easily undone. That will take time, and it also requires contrition. So let me be clear. Never again will the Conservative Party undermine fiscal credibility by making promises that we cannot afford.
If you don't recognise that voice, it's Mel Stride. He's the Conservative shadow Chancellor, and he's out there making one thing very clear. They deeply regret what Liz Truss did to the country and, moreover, to their party, and they want to make sure it can never, ever happen again.
And true to form, Liz Truss has fired back at Mel Stride, saying he is a creature of the establishment, that he had been captured by them. How did the Conservative Party move on when Liz Truss is still utterly convinced that she was right? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
It's Emily. And Mel Stride was making a speech in central London today, which has really taken the party, as it is now, way beyond where they have previously been, even further than Kemi Badenoch, in terms of accepting the damage that Liz Truss did in 2022. £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts and spending pledges, you'll remember, that really unravelled very badly. And he's gone out today to really try and, I guess, be on the front foot and say that they're never, as a party, going to risk the economy with unfunded tax cuts like those in Liz Truss's mini-budget. And I guess the reason that they feel they have to say this is not that they think suddenly that the country's owed an apology. This is 3 years ago. You know, whatever you hear about the need for contrition, I don't think it's got as much to do with that. It's to do with the fact that they are struggling as a party to get past the very narrative of Liz Truss, that they cannot start carving a path for Kemi Badenoch or for whoever, frankly, comes afterwards to lead them anywhere if they don't box up Liz Truss and say, look, we get it, but she was an aberration. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. I think it doesn't speak to the past so much as to the actual present and their poll numbers right now.
Yeah, and the poll numbers, I bet you they have got polling that says that voters still feel furious with what she did over the mini-budget, that she has toxified the brand of the Conservative Party. Frankly, when I hear Liz Truss, I think, is she being paid a retainer by the Labour Party to carry on saying things out loud that just make the life of Conservative Party grandees today who are trying to, turn the Conservative Party into an electable operation again, much more difficult? And, no sooner had Mel Stride said what he had said than Liz Truss is out on Twitter saying, in attacking the mini-budget, Mel Stride sides with the failed Treasury orthodoxy. Stride is a creature of the system. When he served alongside me as Treasury Minister, he always went along with officials. And so you have Liz Truss there. Earlier in the week, you had her with some boxer advertising whiskey, and this guy had been put inside for GBH on a pensioner. And you think, well, that's what judgments does that show? And now she's out there attacking the Conservative leadership again. She's still utterly convinced that she is right and she's going to go down fighting. And, it's all well and good Mel Stride trying to do what he's done today. Is she going to take any notice?
Yeah, and I think the thing to remember is that Mel Stride, doesn't come to this as a neutral player. He was a big backer of Rishi Sunak in that summer election campaign, which Sunak lost, Mel Stride at his side. And when Liz Truss went, sort of had to leave office after the mini budget, Sunak came in and immediately appointed Mel Stride at his side. So there is a sense, I guess, in Mel Stride needing to reassert, if you like, history is all about, political history is all about setting the narrative or resetting the narrative. So I think he wants it to be a story of how it wasn't Sunak's fault that he came in and had to rescue what he could, and it was very much Liz Truss's fault. But I think it's really interesting that it comes now, because what it tells me is that they feel the need to do this because they haven't got enough policy or creative ideas to talk about with Kemi Badenoch right now. I mean, if your party is doing well, the best kind of, I always sort of think the best kind of revenge on losing an election is then to do really well. Right, to show your success, to be up in the polls, to say, oh, well, I bet the country's regretting the day that they voted Labour. But the country isn't. And the Tories are even worse now than they were a year ago. And so rather than sort of saying, what are we doing wrong as a party now? What is Kemi Badenoch not doing that we should be? What should we be striving to do to get people back into the ring and listening to us? To sort of go back 3 years, I feel it's kind of, it suggests that they're scraping around, quite frankly, for something to put them in the right space, to even be an opposition party, never mind a party of government.
Well, you feel that Mel Stride has sort of put on a hazmat suit and is sort of spraying the contaminated area of the party from 3 years ago and trying to decontaminate as much as possible. Would we have made this the lead on our podcast today if this speech stood alone and Liz Truss hadn't immediately fired back? I mean, it's such a double-edged sword. Of course you want to tell the British people that the Conservative Party has moved on from the catastrophic mini-budget of 2022. But she is still fighting, and therefore you think, oh, well, we've got a spat now. We've got the Conservative Party. Liz Truss is still a member of the Conservative Party. I mean, I wonder how much further it has to go before someone says, right, we can't have her in the party anymore.
Yeah.
She no longer belongs. She's very comfortable being on a platform with Steve Bannon and others in America, and members of other far-right parties, or maybe it's time that she went.
Yeah, it reminds me very much, actually, of the summer of 2010, when Gordon Brown lost the election, and that whole summer there was a leadership contest, famously the two Miliband brothers in the middle of it, and a coalition government with Cameron and Clegg at the helm. And George Osborne immediately started sort of recreating a narrative, helped hugely by Liam Burns' note that he left,
which was a joke.
A
dumb joke.
And one that I'm sure he's regretted every day since then, saying we've run out of money. And it allowed Osborne as Chancellor the space to create this narrative that Labour had been profligate, that they'd spent too much money, that they'd thrown it away, that the electorate couldn't trust them anymore with the finances. I mean, with very little recognition that Gordon Brown had been at the helm during the financial crash. But my point is that this is how narratives get set. And it was a very, very difficult narrative for Labour to counter because, quite frankly, the party wasn't there. They were kind of chasing a leadership election. They were running after, the sort of votes from Labour Party members and going around the country talking to people. There was nobody there sort of saying, that's not true, that's not true, that's not what happened, or we spent on the NHS or however the party would have done. And I think this is almost a sort of recognition. This is a recognition by Mel Stride that Labour's doing exactly the same now, that every time they come up with any policy or say anything on economics, Keir Starmer just has to say, well, I'm not going to take lessons from the party that, gave us Liz Truss. And that's kind of the end of the conversation. So they've got to put Liz Truss in her own little black hole, if you like, and move away from her.
They also need to come up with their own ideas of what they are. I mean, you talked about 2010, and I kind of remember, Cameron, when he became leader, saying, go green, vote blue, and he was suddenly hugging a husky and he's concerned about the environment. And it just looks a very different Conservative Party that he's created. what you've got at the moment is Kemi Badenoch and Mel Stride saying we are a very different Conservative Party now compared to what we were. But do we feel it?
Yeah. What
do we
are you?
sense it?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah.
And that is the bit that hasn't yet been filled in.
Yeah. Well, somebody who might help us fill in what needs to happen next is former Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who's going to join us in a moment. Well, we are welcoming back to the Newsagents studio, Newsagents HQ, Jeremy Hunt, who is now the proud author of Can We Be Great Again? And we're going to talk about the book and perhaps more broadly about our place in the world and about the state of your party as well, Jeremy. You kick off with this story about a phone call from Liz Truss that you nearly didn't take because you assumed it was a hoax. And when she asked you to be Chancellor, you say the phone got so red hot you almost dropped it. Was there any doubt in your mind when you got that call you were going to go into the lion's den?
I was with Lucia in a phase of my life, my wife Lucia, I should say, a phase of my life where I was thinking family first after a long time in the cabinet. And I really needed to talk to Lucia before I could accept the job because, you know, being Chancellor, the family move into Downing Street, there's a, you know, it's a huge commitment for the whole family, not just for the person doing the job. But, you know, it's an incredible job. And if I'm honest, I didn't think Liz Truss was going to last very long. So
even when you took the call? Even
when I took the job. So I was thinking, not so much do I want to do this job. Of course you bloody do. It's an amazing job to do. But would I mind being the shortest serving Chancellor in history? And I thought about it. And to be honest, I had what in retrospect seems the most trivial of thoughts. But I have been campaigning as chair of the Health and Social Care Committee for a long-term workforce plan for the NHS, basically to double the number of doctors and nurses we train. It was something I've been passionate about for a long time. And it's the Treasury who have been blocking it. And they advised Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor to block it. And I thought if I can just bloody get this through, even if I'm only Chancellor for 2 weeks, I won't have wasted my time.
Presumably, you would have also thought, I'm going to have untrammeled power, unlike any other Chancellor in history, because Liz Truss was in no position to act as a block on anything you wanted to do.
That didn't really cross my mind, although when I actually got the job and I saw close up how perilous the situation was, I did think there was some irony in the fact that the guy who tried to become leader of the party 3 times round for a very, very brief period was actually pretty powerful in the country. But, you know, it was... that was an irony, actually, that lots of people have pointed out to me subsequently. I think at the time, though, I was just, you know, very preoccupied with this incredible crisis. I mean, markets crashing around our ears.
I mean, it's interesting. Mel Stride has come out today pretty forcibly saying never again will the Conservatives undermine fiscal credibility. I mean, that is a pretty clear target on Liz Truss's back, isn't it? I mean, do you think that the Conservatives are still living with Liz Truss, even in the way that Kemi Badenoch presents herself now?
It is definitely the case that Keir Starmer wants the world to believe, and you can see this at every PMQs, that the Conservative Party is the party of the mini-budget. And
that's not Starmer, though. That's Mel Stride. That's one of your own.
And so I think that we are realising as a party that we have to draw a line very publicly under that. I mean, I was always said when I was Chancellor it was a big mistake, and we reversed it almost immediately. But given Labour's political strategy to kind of make this for us what Liam Byrne's note about having run out of money was for the last Labour government, I think we are going to end up much more publicly being clear that it was a mistake and absolutely never again.
So let's talk about, I mean, some of her conduct now is eccentric to say the least. I mean, she took part in an advert this week for a whiskey being promoted by a former boxer who just come out of prison after committing GBH on a 78-year-old pensioner in a pub in Manchester. I mean, it goes on and on. I could list a number of things, and hanging out with some pretty strange people. Would the Conservative Party be better off without her in it?
Well, that's a decision for Kemi Badenoch. I feel, well, I'll be honest with you, John. I feel slightly conflicted when asked that question because she appointed me Chancellor, and as I explain in the book, in the the few days when she was Prime Minister, she had to do something quite courageous, which was to sit next to me in the House of Commons as I ripped up almost everything that she'd done as Prime Minister and everything she'd campaigned for. And she did so with significant courage, actually. I know it's not fashionable to stick up for Liz Truss, but that cannot have been easy for her. So I am nervous about publicly criticising her, but it's absolutely not helpful what she's doing, and I don't agree with it. And I think we do have to draw a line under the mistakes of that period, because they are being thrown at us week in, week out in Parliament.
She's not drawing the line. It's really interesting, isn't it, that she keeps on referring, even today, she's hit back at Mel Stride and called him part of the failed Treasury orthodoxy. I wonder if she'd apply the same to you. She still thinks she was right.
And, there is this weird thing in politics where sometimes you persuade yourself to believe something that's patently rubbish because you just have to, because the psychological consequences of accepting. I mean, Liz, as a free marketeer, can never accept that it was actually the markets that brought her down. And for her, it has to be some fictitious plot by the establishment, the Bank of England. And the reality was the markets were not going to stomach those unfunded tax cuts and spending commitments. I think it's often characterised as an issue of tax cuts, but it was actually the energy price guarantee that probably spooked the markets more than the tax cuts, because we were saying, your energy bills will never be more than £2,000. I mean, that's a hell of a commitment in an environment where you think that energy prices are going to stay high for a long time. And as we've seen with Trump, who was stopped in his tracks by the market, as actually we've seen with Rachel Reeves, who had a very wobbly moment earlier on this year. The old saying, I think it was Carville who said, didn't he, about the
bond
back as
market
the bond
won't
market.
come back as the bond market.
This is true, and that's what in the end meant that Liz Truss had to change direction, and I think she finds that very, very difficult. So she's persuaded herself of all sorts of things that are just not true.
Can I just frame the question then slightly differently? If you're not going to call for her to leave the Conservative Party, I suspect you wouldn't mourn if she chose herself to depart.
I put it this way, John, because I do want to be honest about this. We have got to draw a line under that incident.
Is that personally as well? Do you still talk to her? Have you been in touch with her recently?
We exchange very occasional texts, but I haven't been in touch with her since the election. And we've got to draw a line under it. And in politics, you do sometimes have to take very difficult decisions. But and the reality is we're paying a very high political price at the moment. And let's be clear, after the mini budget, Mel Stride, myself, Rishi Sunak, we didn't do enough to save ourselves at the election, but we did stabilise the economy. We brought inflation down to 2%. We got the economy growing again. And all that is forgotten at the moment.
So let me just ask you, when you say we're paying a high political price at the moment, does any of that have any bearing on how Kemi Badenoch is performing as leader? Or do you think she's just in the shadow? I mean, it sounds when you say that like she's still in the shadow of Liz Truss, but I guess a lot of people listening would say, well, Kemi Badenoch's also had a year just under to sort of make her impression. She hasn't really done it.
We have had 4 leaders in 4 years, and I think we have got to get over this idea that at the smallest amount of difficulties, the answer is just to change your leader. I think we would have zero credibility. What I would say is that 2 things, actually. It's not clear to me that anyone would have done any better than Kemi Badenoch, given that we've just had the worst defeat in our history. The country wanted us out after 14 years. But we have now got to move on from contrition to ideas and solutions. And I think there is a football pitch-sized hole in British politics for a party that offers solutions. People don't feel Labour is doing it. They listen to Nigel Farage with his £80 billion of tax cuts. And I think they want to know, what is the solution? And that's what an opposition party properly needs to be arguing for.
It's not a ringing endorsement, is it, of your current leader?
Well, I recognise that we have to have a period of silence, contrition, recognising that we've been, in Mike Tyson's
But aren't you
phrase,
saying
punched
now
in the
get
face.
on with it?
But we do now need to start offering solutions, yes.
Yeah, and just on that, though, your message is stick with Kemi. It would be ludicrous to do it otherwise. It looks to everyone that Robert Jenrick is on manoeuvres and is promoting himself as, well, come look over here, very performative stuff being put out on social media, some of it very effective. I mean, what would you say to his ambitions?
I just think we all need to get in behind Kemi, and in politics, I think you have to concentrate on the substance. And we have to answer the question, what will be different if you elected a Conservative government? What are the solutions? Now, I'll give you one example. By the way, I think this book is an attempt to say what some of those solutions might be in terms of Britain's role in the world. But one of them, which is a domestic issue as well as an international issue, which I think is a really important one, is the migration crisis.
Yeah.
Now, this is not a British crisis, it's a global crisis. And actually, it originates from some very positive news for humanity. When we were all born, I shouldn't speculate on when we were all born, but when we were all born, when I was born in 1966, half the world lived in extreme poverty, less than $1 a day. Now the definition has gone up to $2.15 because of inflation. And it's fallen from half the world to 9% of the world. And that is a wonderful, brilliant, amazing achievement, which we don't shout about often enough. But the consequence is that many more people can afford to move. By the way, in that period, the global population has nearly tripled, so it's an even more impressive achievement. The European Convention on Human Rights, the 1951 Refugee Convention, need to be ripped up and rewritten for a modern age in which...
you say here that Keir Starmer
and
should
Keir
be the one to
Starmer,
do it.
I do actually think this is a big opportunity for Keir Starmer. I mean, we just happened, not only did we
Have
write...
you said that to him directly? Or have you just put it in the
I'm
book?
going to send him a copy of this book today, and there's a letter to him in the back of the book. But I do think that, first of all, we wrote this law, so it's very associated with Britain. It was written by someone called David Maxwell Fyfe in the immediate years after the Second World War. But secondly, we happen to be led by a human rights lawyer who knows this law backwards. If there was someone who was going to stand on the international stage and say, we want to treat refugees humanely, we always want people who are genuinely persecuted to be able to escape,
but we don't want the system abused.
But we need a law where people we've decided to deport legally, we can actually deport. We're able to stop.
And that does need a rewriting, does it?
It needs a complete rewriting.
So what would you say to Robert Jenrick then, who has been very vocal in sort of buzzing around Kemi Badenoch's ear since basically she took office? We know where he stands on the ECHR. I'm wondering how helpful it is to your party. I mean, is there a bit of you that just sort of thinks, STFU?
I think it's as someone who has often people speculated in the past that I've been on leadership manoeuvres. There is an aspect of modern politics where when a leader is in difficulty and anyone else in his or her team does something that attracts publicity, people say they're on manoeuvres.
You don't think he is?
I don't know if he is or not. I'm just
come
saying.
on.
I'm just saying.
Come on.
No, but there is an element where literally, because he was the runner-up, anything he does, people are going to have that kind of speculation.
What, running into the underground?
But should he
trying
be
to find fare dodgers?
Look, should he be on manoeuvres? No, because we need to row in and give Kemi all the support we can.
And what do you suspect? Do you suspect he is?
I'm not going to be drawn, I'm afraid. But I don't know. But I think we all need to, be sensible.
Let's go to the letter. Should we go to the letter?
Yeah.
You talk about the need for radical decisions on welfare reform and public sector productivity, and you warn him not to be too timid. You say nobody ever regretted being radical in government. I mean, presumably...
With the exception of Liz
Truss.
Truss.
I was just going to say that. So what do you want to see in the spending review? If he's listening, if he gets the letter in time, if
Yes.
Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer talk, what should happen there?
Well, I am really worried. I talk about this in the book because you can't advocate, as I do, for spending much more on defence and, living up to our other global commitments unless you answer, where is the money going to come from? And the thing about this book is I wrote half of it after I stepped down as Foreign Secretary. And I was sort of merrily arguing for Britain to do more on global security and the future of democracy and so on. And then I stopped because I unexpectedly became Chancellor after that text message from Liz Truss. And then I came back to it after the election, and I had to write a rather different book, because as a former Chancellor, you've got to say how you're going to pay for it. And I think the answer is, in the long run, we all know that we need to get the growth rate up, but that takes time. And so you've got to say, what are you going to do in the short run?
The latest figures are pretty good, though, aren't they? 0.7% growth in the last quarter.
Yeah, but anything less than the 2% growth that we used to have before the global financial crisis means that sooner or later, with the pressures on the NHS and defence, we're going to run out of money. Now, in the short term, there is only one game in town. And what I'm worried about for Rachel Reeves, who I have a lot of respect for, is that we're going to get to the budget in the autumn and she's going to put up taxes again, and we're going to kill off growth. And then we're going to get into this doom loop of ever higher taxes.
So wait a second, so your game in town is cutting?
Well, certainly I would like to, in the long run, cut taxes, but certainly not...
No, not cutting taxes. Okay. But for her, when you say there's only one game in town, I mean...
You didn't let me finish the sentence. There's only one game in town, and it's welfare reform. And let me explain why. If we got the working age benefit bill down to the level it was just 5 years ago before the pandemic, that would save £49 billion a year. And the argument I would make to Rachel is, look, this is very difficult territory, particularly for the Labour Party, but it's the start of a parliament. You've got a time, you've got a big majority. And in the end, most of that increase has happened because of an explosion in people saying that they have mental illness, which is making it difficult for them to work. And I think our approach, and I say this as someone who was health secretary for a long time, our approach to people who are mentally ill should be to treat them, not to sign them off work. I mean, at the moment, every year...
So if we actually paid out the kind of mental health that many people in this country need, it would almost certainly be more than what you're saving on the welfare budget. I mean, you know it's massively underfunded.
By a massive multiple. I can tell you the numbers, actually. You could double the number of people getting talking therapies treatment for anxiety and depression, double them, and it would cost an extra £1 billion a year. And the saving, £49 billion a year. And you know, every doctor I've met says that if someone has anxiety or depression, the thing that helps most of all is social contact. But we are actually, the 80,000 we're signing off every year, of whom more than half it's primarily for mental health reasons, they are all people who would massively benefit from being engaged in the world of work. And we're saying not just that you don't have to work, but you don't even have to look for work.
I mean, wouldn't Rachel Reeves probably agree with you? I mean, I think I heard her at a thing the other day where she was making almost exactly the same argument. They're arguing that taxation has reached as high as it can go, borrowing has reached as high as it can go. If you do anything that too much in either of those directions, it's going to be a very bad outcome.
And they're already doing... So you presumably agree with the PIPs reforms?
Absolutely. But I think we need to... This is the time to go much further, and that the heart of the issue is that something very positive, which I was responsible for as Health Secretary, which is this thing called parity of esteem between mental and physical health, which is in 2 acts of Parliament now. That has been brilliant for the NHS. So the NHS is treating about 2 million more people a year than it used to for mental illness. That's a brilliant social advance. But it doesn't apply to the benefit system, but we have interpreted it to apply to the benefit system. And I think it is doing actually a lot of damage to the nation's mental health. But this would be good fiscally. It would be good economically, because obviously it means that companies, businesses trying to expand would find it easier to get the new workers that they need. But also it'd be good for the individuals involved. So it's a big, bold thing.
But the problem that the Labour Party's got is not that people around the country think that she's not cutting enough in terms of disability, or she's not cutting enough in terms of winter fuel, or she's not, cutting enough from children who probably would really help, be helped by getting benefits and credits. The problem is that she is doing those things and people tell her they don't like it.
Because, it's very easy as a former Chancellor to be a backseat driver, but I don't think this should be presented as welfare cuts. We should be a new deal for people with mental illness and it should be presented as a big expansion in mental health provision in the NHS with the funding to go with it, in order to get people off benefits and into the world of work, which is much, much better for their mental health. So that is the big thing. Now, what I'm worried about is if we don't do that, and by the way, I think it's a totally reasonable objective to say over the course of a parliament, it doesn't have to be done in 12 months flat, but over the course of a parliament, we're going to bring, in real terms, the working age welfare bill down to the level it was before the pandemic. So it's a big piece of work to do that. But that then releases the pressure, because we're now spending about 11% of GDP on the overall welfare bill. That includes pensions as well. But that is a huge amount, and I don't believe it's sustainable.
Just on the state of the world, you came on a few months ago, you talked about what you need to do to get on board with Donald Trump. Is there anything you can do to get on board with Donald Trump that will have any meaning, any longevity, not be overturned the next day on a whim?
Well, John, we talked about this last time I came onto the show, and I think the first thing about Donald Trump is, he is capable of making your very worst case scenario happen. He's not someone who pulls back, and we are right now in a huge moment of danger, imminent, because 3 weeks' time we have the NATO summit in Brussels. I sat around the table at the 2018 NATO summit when Donald Trump nearly pulled America out of NATO. You must remember that time. I'm sure you reported on it. Well, you were there, right. So you know how that showdown with Angela Merkel was a terrifying moment. Trump's chief of staff flew over from Washington in an emergency to talk him out of it. Those were the days, by the way, when Trump surrounded himself with people who are willing to challenge him. That's not the case anymore. And Trump knows the way he gets attention is through conflict. And, if Europe doesn't commit to spending more on defence, we are facing a very dangerous moment. Now, what I'd say to Keir Starmer is, if Britain committed to 3% of GDP on defence, not just, an ambition, but a firm commitment. And by the way, he's committed to the programme that's going to cost 3% of GDP on defence. And when I next see Rachel, I'm going to pull her leg, because I would call it a black hole to commit to a programme that is 3% of GDP and only put 2.5% on the table. But look, let's be sensible here. Keir could say, we're going to do this.
Yeah, and then Trump could say 3.5%, and Hess could say 5%.
Possibly,
where does it end?
Well, I'll tell you, but if France and Germany follow suit, America's on 3.4%. We should broadly be saying we're going to match the United States in terms of its commitment to defence. Then you have the possibility of heading off what is the most catastrophic thing that could happen to European defence, which is an American withdrawal from NATO. And look, if that happens, we wouldn't be arguing about...
There is no certainty, honestly, though. But Jeremy, you know Trump. You've been in the room with him. I think we all have here. There is no certainty that what he says today will stay in place next week. Hesketh's already on the airwaves today saying it's 5%. I mean, that's the problem that you set for yourself, isn't it? That you're dealing with a very capricious, volatile leader who loves combat and rose back or rose even further on things that he said minutes before.
Yes, and the only thing you can do in that situation is to address the substance of the problem. And the substance of the problem is that right now, American taxpayers are paying for around 40% of the defence of Europe. And that is unfair. And painful though it is to say so, Trump has a point, and we need to show Trump and the administration that we're addressing that problem. And look, when David Cameron actually persuaded NATO to adopt the 2% target in 2014, we were one of only 3 countries doing it. Now, 23 NATO countries do that, and we're spending about $400 billion a year more. So my point is that Britain is not a passive observer. We can actually be the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic outcome.
Okay, given NATO, given tariffs, given his ambitions to make Canada the 51st state, what would your answer to the question be? Is America a reliable ally?
Well, America, by the way, I call this book Can We Be Great Again? But as I'm sure you both know, I'm not a MAGA conservative. and I make a very strong argument for the defence of open societies and democratic values, and I think it's very clear that we are not going to get leadership on that front from Donald Trump. But this is actually an optimistic book at a rather gloomy time, and let me give you 2 reasons for optimism. If we had had a crystal ball 6 months ago, and we'd looked into it to see the future with Mystic Meg, and we'd seen Trump is going to win, he's going to do Liberation Day. I think, tariffs of 145% on China, 20% on the EU, 50% on steel. I think we'd have all predicted there's going to be a global trade war, a global depression back to the 1930s. Instead, what's happened is the rest of the world has looked at Trump and said, thanks, but no thanks. America's only 14% of world trade. You can do that if you want. But, the EU signed a free trade deal with Mercosur. We've done one with India. And I would say that, the rest of the world has to, KBO, as Churchill would say, in a very difficult times, and remember the things that really matter. And I want Britain to be a strong voice in doing that.
But you were just asked if Trump's a reliable ally.
Well, patently, when it comes to, things like defence of democratic values, climate change, this is not something we can rely on Trump to show leadership on. But Trump isn't America. He's not going to be president forever.
No, but for example, the trade deal. If you were Keir Starmer now, would you say, I've got something in my hand that I can take back to the electorate and know it will work? Do you believe that?
I think that Keir Starmer's actually done a very good job when it comes to international diplomacy, as good as could possibly be expected. But I just want to make this bigger point about, is Trump a reliable ally? Because, the reality is that right now there is a global battle between democracies and autocracies. And it feels to me quite similar to the 1970s when I was growing up and we had the Soviet Union, a totally different ideology. Obviously, the world is different. In a way, it's a more challenging battle because the autocracies have got capitalism and they're no longer...
they're no longer Cuba.
They're no longer Cuba, exactly. They're no longer
yeah.
poor. So in that context, we need, if we're going to win this battle this century, and I desperately want us to, we need the most powerful democracy in the world, which is the United States, to be part of the family of democracies. And so I think we need to do what we can during this difficult period with Trump to keep, as far as we can, America knitted in to that global family of democracies. Not going to be easy, but Trump isn't going to be there forever. And, in the end, this is going to take longer than the next few years to resolve. And I want my kids to grow up in a world where freedom is winning, frankly.
But Jeremy, just let me ask you this finally. I mean, the readout of the call yesterday between Putin and Trump, whose side is he on? Is he on the side of autocracies, where he's saying, Putin, I understand if you're going to retaliate, or is he on the side of democracies?
I'm going to answer that question, as it's my last answer, with...
By pivoting.
Yeah, by running out the door.
No, I'm not. I'm going to answer it by referring to one of the proudest things I did, which I talk about in the book, which is when I met Zelensky to explain to him that we were going to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. And let's go back to that crystal ball, because fundamentally I do not agree, as I'm sure you don't, with Trump's view on Ukraine and his view on Zelensky, who in my book is one of the bravest men in the planet. But if we'd looked in that crystal ball 6 months ago and we'd said, Trump is not just going to withdraw support for Ukraine, he's actually going to take Russia's side. I think we both have said, Ukraine is finished. And what's happened, Zelensky has also said, thanks, but no thanks.
That's not the question. The question was about Trump. And is he on the side of autocrats or Democrats? You just said you want America to be part of the world of freedom.
Well,
do you think Trump sides with Democrats over autocrats? Because he doesn't seem to.
Quite patently, not as much as I would want him to be. And he changes direction, as you've alluded to a lot. But the point I'm making is that, Ukraine looks to many people like a small country, but they actually have the most powerful weapon of all, which is they are fighting for their own existence. And I think in those situations, what we need to be doing, what Britain as Europe's premier military power is we need to be rallying Europe to get its act together on defence, rallying people behind Ukraine, and having a little bit of hope that in very unpredictable times, with a very unpredictable American president who, disappointingly, we find we don't agree with on many, many issues. Despite that, we need to have a little bit of hope, not just that we can get the right outcome, but that Britain can help craft that outcome.
Jeremy Hunt, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Earlier on this week, not for the first time, I thought Emily Maitlis had completely lost her marbles when she was going on about some game involving cutting up chocolate, apparently with a blindfold, and it was a metaphor for something, and I can't remember what the metaphor was for, and I thought, oh my God, Maitlis, you've lost it.
No, so I was talking about the legislative programme of Donald Tusk and how the new Polish president could potentially undo his entire next 3 years' work.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of a game that I'm really amazed that you never used to play. Is it a 70s, 80s game? It was called the Chocolate Game. And what you have to do is you have to sit round in a circle, throw a dice. And when somebody throws a 6, you have to be blindfolded, put on big fat boxer's gloves and have a knife and fork with which you then have to try and carve up chocolate. And if somebody throws a 6, just as you are putting a piece of chocolate into your mouth, you have to put down your fork straight away and it goes to the next person. In other words, there is no joy because you never get the chocolate. And I asked how many people remembered it. And I have to say, we have been, and I'm going to use this word, inundated with emails, including Steph, who said, yes, Emily, the chocolate game was an absolute staple at parties when I was a kid. I can't believe John doesn't know about it. Roll a 6, hat, gloves, knife, fork, get as much as you can. That is from Steph. And Anne, I have to say, says, I still play the chocolate game. I absolutely loved it as a kid, and I'm sure that's why I'm addicted to chocolate today. Although, and very good point, not the same with the flatter bars. The old chunky bars seemed much harder to stab with a fork. Yeah.
I tell you what,
Also
I'm
from
just
Laura.
noticing something else. There's also an email here from Laura.
And Rachel.
I want to tell Emily that
And
I love...
Kirsty.
Have you noticed something? They're all
Jill.
women.
They're all women.
They're all women who love the chocolate game.
I know.
I've had a very sheltered life. That's all I can say, that I didn't know anything about
I
it.
think we ought to do you a YouTube video for first-timers of the newsagents with their blindfold and their knife and fork and a big, thick slab of chunky chocolate. We'll show you how to play.
That's still to come. God help us. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.